It's the last day of August, we can surely, we can still celebrate this good weather. Anyway, the one I want to introduce is Harry Quinn, and most of you know him. And even we have people come at the museum, all we have to do is mention your name, Harry. A lot of people know you from one aspect or another.
Probably from the post office.
The post office, right. Okay, and Harry's going to give us a talk today on the Steve Ragsdale and the cabin and some information up there in that neck of the woods. 42, okay? Okay, then we'll let Harry go ahead. I think we have everybody introduced. Thank you.
Okay, Linda asked me to talk about something, and I thought maybe Steve Ragsdale, because several people here seem to know the Ragsdale family. Was an interesting one. We were at the Pinyon Harvest with a group of Native Americans this weekend, and one of the people works up on Toro Peak, and just last week, I guess it was, or 2 weeks ago, somebody showed up there when he was working, and it turned out to be one of the Ragsdales. I guess Steve's great-grandson was up there trying to get up to where the old cabin was. The road right now, if anybody wants to go up, the road right now is in great shape. They had to haul oil up to the generators up on the mountain, so they bladed the road. But if you try to get up to the Steve's cabin or to any of the side roads, they're in pretty bad shape. But the main road itself is very good.
Well, how do you get started from the desert going up?
Take 74 up past Pinyon, you'll go past what's now Spring Crest, and you'll come to a dirt road on your left that says Santa Rosa Mountain Truck Trail. And you can take that on up. Teresa and I took the Sawmill Road. That one hasn't been used for several years, probably 30. I don't think you want to take a car on that one. But the other one is passable to a car as long as you have high clearance. Anyway, I had as a child growing up with a lot of people at Pinyon, one of which was Steve Ragsdale. And Steve was quite a person. I learned to play dominoes there. My grandfather and Steve liked to play dominoes, and I used to tag around as a little kid, and so finally we decided that if I was going to sit there, I should learn how to play. So that was where I learned to play dominoes, and Steve had this big hand-carved ivory set of double nines for me to learn on. This was the house at Pinyon that I remember Steve. Steve lived in this house, which he called Betwixt and Between. His eighth heaven was up on Santa Rosa, and his home was down here at Desert Center. He started Desert Center by buying a small area, a small group of buildings that was actually on the Rice Road. And they were not doing real well on the Rice Road, so he moved them down and put them on 6070, where they are today. And Steve used to say his town had the longest main street in any city, because it was 50 miles to Blythe and 50 miles to Indio. So, Steve was a character. I have nothing but good things to say about him. Here is Steve sitting in front of his old cabin up on Santa Rosa. This was what he called Eighth Heaven. And most of you, if you knew Steve, you knew Terry Lowe. Terry Lowe was his secretary. Steve didn't drive. Terry Lowe did all the driving. And when we used to go up to the mountain, Steve only used goat's milk, and he had his own goats. And at Pinyon, the old goat shed was turned into the fire station, volunteer fire station. Now it's used as just a hay barn. It's still there, but we used to have to take care of his goats when he would go somewhere. And there was one time we ended up with both goats. Usually he would take one goat with him, and we only had to look after one goat. But for a week we had 2 goats. And you can amass a lot of goat's milk in 2 weeks. And what happened was my mom finally learned to make cheese. And all the people that wouldn't drink the goat's milk loved the goat cheese. So you could tell our cabin, because out on the clothesline were all these little bags of stuff hanging on the clothesline to make cheese out of. One of my experiences was going up to Santa Rosa with Terry Lowe and Steve Ragsdale. He had a touring car, which he took the back seat out of, and he could carry 1 goat and 2 bales of hay, or 2 goats and 1 bale of hay, or me, 1 goat and a bale of hay. And the back seat was the bale of hay. So this is Steve up on his 8th heaven. And if most of you, or some of you have been up there, you remember the old lookout. The first thing, when this was turned over to the Forest Service, the first thing they did was tear down the lookout because somebody was going to get hurt. I probably could have been killed a long time ago as a kid just climbing up and down this thing. From this lookout, which he had built into the top of one of the trees, and the interesting thing is the cabins were gone and burned down, but the tree that had the lookout in it is still there. And you can see the flat top of that tree. We were just up there. You see the flat top of that tree where that lookout was. From this lookout, on a clear day, you could look clear down into Baja with no trouble at all. It was very neat, and the entire thing was made from split logs that were taken off right there on the mountain. Here's another shot of it from the side view, if you can see it going up into the tree right here. And this was a great thing for kids. I spent a lot of time, just going up, looking, and coming back down, and then remembering I needed to look something else, and then go back up again. But nowadays, everybody's got to be protected. This is a shot from the top of the lookout, just looking at across country. And you've got to remember, the old cameras didn't capture as much as the new cameras, so some of these are not tremendously good. Steve was noted, even though he didn't do the poetry, he actually had somebody else do it, but he's been called by many people the world's worst poet. This is one of the trees that got painted, "My heart is dead," enough said. And if any of you knew Steve, the enough said was Steve Ragsdale. Just about anything that he talked about when he finished, it was enough said at that point. This is one of the trees. These trees are still there. Somebody's gone back up and repainted them, and the big one on the rock is still there. So you can go up and see those. Now, Steve knew he was going to die. He had this in his mind, so he decided that he wanted to be buried down by Desert Center at the end of Alligator Ridge. So he got my grandfather and 3 people from the Santa Rosa Indian Reservation, Callisto Tortoise, George Tortoise, and Art Lanche, to go down and prepare his grave site down at the end of the ridge. Here's a picture of the group down there doing the excavation to put in this big steel tub in which his coffin was going to be placed. The interesting thing is, less than a month ago, we were down visiting Garbani's. Mary Garbani, her dad built the tub. He was a sheet metal worker, and we got to talking about Steve, and she says, "Oh yeah, my dad built the tub for his grave, but I don't know whatever happened to it." Well, here it is. And here's some of the crew down there. Now, Terry Lowe would come over to their Indian reservation. She would pick up the 3 people from over there, come back, pick up Steve and my dad and my grandfather, and then they would go down there and work on this gravesite. Here's a picture of them excavating into this area, and they did this with just pick and shovel. And this is not soft dirt. This took them several days. In fact, I think it was close to a week that they worked on this to get this in. Here's Desert Steve standing next to his tub, and with the wood thing that was supposed to go, the lid that was supposed to go over top of it. And in the back on this rock, you can see part of the plaque. My grandfather hung the plaque, single jacked that boulder to hang that plaque on that rock.
Harry, was your grandfather one of the men in here?
Yes. He's in
This is the one with the 3 of them standing down in
the 3 in the hole are the 3 from Santa Rosa.
Uh-huh.
And there is one of these that my grandfather is in. This is the same picture we passed around, there's 2 copies of it. This is the plaque that my grandfather hung, that was supposed to be the plaque. He was supposed to die that year, he just didn't do it. Was gone for a long time. The irony of this whole thing was, when he did die, the county wouldn't let him be buried there. So this is still sitting there. If you go there today, I haven't been there for a couple of years, but the last time I was there, the steel tub was still in the ground, and you could go over and see this, and the plaque was still hanging up onto the rocks. This was Desert Center. Oh, here's the one with my grandfather in it. This has the whole crew. My grandfather is the one in the center, right next to the tub, Steve, and then the 3 people from Santa Rosa. This is Desert Center. Some of you might remember an old Desert Center. It was noted for its Greyhound bus depot, and could not figure out who went there. But it was a Greyhound bus stop, and they did have a cafe, and one of the meal places on the run was at Desert Center.
What year was that?
This picture is taken since I moved back. That was sometime in the 80s.
Oh, in the 80s.
It hasn't changed much,
No,
other than the old filling stations is now a new filling station across the street. These were the old houses. I was surprised. I moved back here in '78. I went back out to talk to Stanley Ragsdale, and the thing that was interesting was that I took all these pictures, and it was like being back when I was there before. Nothing had really changed.
Historic preservation. I don't understand this up.
Here's another shot of the old Greyhound bus depot. Now, most of you have seen the periscope. If you look in the periscope, you will find part of the writing I did in there is a deal on Steve Ragsdale. Some of the photos that were passed around are in there. This is the 2008 periscope. And they got a picture of me on the back. And my wife does. So, and also did an article on Steve for the High Country Journal that was done some years back. That was done. But
Harry, Connie and I went to high school with a fellow that lived at Desert Center, remember David? He had to drive in every day to CD High School, and he lives in Mississippi now. Anytime there's anything in the paper about Desert Center, anything comes up, I send it to him. He still loves to hear about it. And that was when I first heard about Steve Ragsdale, was from David. He used to talk about what a character Steve Ragsdale was. And he told me the story about, you know, the proposed burial site and how they weren't allowed to use it.
well, at the time they dug it, nobody cared.
no.
But by the time he died, they stayed.
Yeah.
They changed their mind.
When the government steps in to help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Where's
And
he
then-
buried?
but a lot of things said about Steve, a lot of it not complimentary, but I have to say that I have nothing that I can say bad about Steve. Yeah.
Oh, well, my husband worked out there at that Standard Station.
And he worked at that Standard Station out there and lived out there for about a year. And they had all kinds of stories. And I think his son was out there at the time, but there was all kinds of stories going around. And he said there was something to do with those palm trees and the way that they were shaped out there.
Oh, that was Stanley.
Right.
Yeah. That
But there was a reason that those palm trees was planted specifically like they were.
Yeah, there was a reason, and right now I can't remember what it was, but the other thing was that he took all those because they were gonna be scrapped. They were just gonna be removed and thrown away, and he ended up buying them and hauling them out there to do that. The palm trees have been let go because of the water problem out there. They started farming asparagus out there several years ago, and they began pumping water in great quantities for their asparagus. and they lowered the water table to the point where it's pretty well gone now. If you go out there, all the asparagus fields are dead. Most everything else is gone, and water is a precious item now, so the trees were left to go. The water is used for people and not for the trees.
Well, they have.
Stanley had a great idea of those trees. They were going to be the thing that was going to revive Desert Center and bring everybody in from the highway. And by gosh, it was working. People would see those trees and they couldn't figure out what was going on, and they'd pull in to see why. I mean, he had his idea, but with the passing of Stanley, those ideas are all gone now. The part I couldn't believe about Stanley was that when I went to see him, he has the same cancer that his dad had. Stanley and his dad had a lot of things in common when I was talking with him. Just, you know, it is just the mannerism and stuff. Talking with Stanley, it was almost like being back talking to Steve. The last stages when Steve was at the betwixt and between, I could not see him. I could only talk to him through the door. Terry Lowe would come to the door and she would allow us to talk back and forth, but Steve told me that he said, I want you to remember me as I was, not as I am now. Because the cancer was so bad, and I couldn't believe it, because when I went out to meet with Stanley, Stanley had the same facial cancer, everything that his dad had.
Now, has he died, Stanley?
Stanley's gone.
Where is Steve buried? I think they went to school together.
Well, Stanley came all the way in to go to school here.
Yeah, but didn't he go to Riverside,
Oh, we got some
junior college too? Seems to me like I remember Frank talking about them going together back and forth.
This is mine.
I don't know on that, because when I talked to him, he was just talking about his trips coming in to go to school. They had to drive all the way in to go to school here. So, that's all I have, and I'll try to answer any
Where's
questions.
Steve buried now?
I believe he's in this cemetery right here.
Oh.
On Jackson?
I think that's the one he finally ended up in.
I think I found him out there, just by chance.
I've talked to several people and nobody seemed to know exactly where he ended up, but a couple people told me that he ended up here in this cemetery.
What year did he die?
I'm thinking in the 70s. I
Would've
mean, he
been
thought he
70s.
was gone in the 40s, but he just didn't do it. He was an ordained minister. He was also a deputy sheriff. If you look back at his history, it's rather intriguing. He was a lot of different things before they came to California.
Which church?
I don't know.
There isn't a book about his life history or anything like that, huh?
Not that I have found. I've written the stuff that I've written that I've been able to get information. I did, as I say, I went out to talk to Stanley, and I do have a lot of stuff that Stanley gave me that.
Now, are there descendants from Stanley?
Yes,
Well, you know, somebody should write a book. I would think it would be very interesting. Where was he born?
I think he was born in Missouri.
Because he was a character.
Darn
Enough
domino player.
What is this, the fellow that was last weekend, you said he was a great
Said he
grandson?
was a grandson of Steve Ragsdale, who had the cabin. Anthony Largo was up working, he was up working on the station up on Toro Peak, and they were coming down when they met him. And he identified himself as a Ragsdale, and as a grandson of the person who had the cabin up there. He was,
So that means Steve was married and had children?
oh yeah.
Yeah, okay.
His wife ran Desert Center, and he lived with his secretary up at Pinion. And she took care of the kids down there, and they had a number of goats. In fact, there's a couple of articles about them having a goat ranch at Desert Center, and I've never been able to confirm that. But I do know he had 2 goats that we took care of. They were both Salmons that we used to take care of periodically.
Maybe somebody considered that a goat ranch.
Yeah. But he had built a nice big building up below the cabin for his goats. In fact, the goat shed was much nicer than the cabin.
Then the house they lived in.
Yeah, sometimes when we would go up there, we'd end up sleeping in the goat shed rather than up at the cabin. But the last time I was up there, the cabin's burned down and the goat shed's gone, there's no trace of it.
Well, that was very nice of you, Harry, to come with all of your history and some of the trips that you and Teresa took, you know, I think, oh God, to be younger.